Well, to talk more about Valentine's Day costs, I'm joined by Carol Spieckerman. She is president of Spieckerman Retail. Carol, thank you so much for joining our program today.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Francis. Thank you.
Well, Carol, we just saw in Williams' report prices are up across the board for traditional Valentine's Day products. Flowers, jewelry, food, you name it, are up across the board. And yet the National Retail Federation says this year is expected to be the second highest year for Valentine's Day spending on record. So what does this say about the economy amid this pandemic and consumer confidence?
Well, I think one of the big tailwinds is that there's a lot of pent-up demand. Consumers have been denying themselves all kinds of extravagances, so they're ready to spoil and splurge, and Valentine's Day is a perfect excuse to do that. So consumer confidence is higher, but also too, Valentine's Day this year is very well timed. It comes in the wake of a pretty positive holiday season, and also too at a time when mask mandates are starting to get relaxed again. COVID cases are plummeting in some areas. And so there are a lot of positive factors that are helping to mitigate some of these inflationary concerns.
And Carol, some Valentine's Day products, like flowers in particular, are imported from other countries. So looking at it internationally, how much are supply chain issues impacting those prices?
Supply chain issues combined with labor shortages are just sort of the double whammy that just keeps on hitting retailers and consumers too. So really those are some impossible, it seems to be, to overcome. They're just going to be an everyday reality, I think, for the short to midterm.
Yeah, that actually goes into my next question about, how long can we see these high prices? Are we talking about, years? When might we see some relief from this?
Well, we're probably going to be looking at inflationary concerns at least through the third or fourth quarter of this year. If anything, for the short term, I think they're going to expand to more categories. Automotive has been such a big part of this story, but of course it's continued to break out into other categories as well, into home goods and things like that. And that causes consumers, in some cases, especially as much as we're all talking about it and publicizing it, it causes consumers to sometimes take a wait and see attitude. So that can exacerbate the whole situation. But I think we're looking at these inflationary dynamics probably at least until third and fourth quarter of this year. But a lot of it relies on this COVID trajectory, which is sort of a moving target.
And Carol, how are retailers adjusting to these rising prices besides passing them on to consumers? And how might they have to change their marketing to appeal to consumers, or will they have to?
Well, I think retailers it depends on the type of retailer. It's really difficult to generalize. Some of these smaller retailers are having a harder time of it because they just don't have the same buying power and the resources, and in some cases they can't strong arm their suppliers in the same way that these big guys can. Also, too, favor goes to retailers that are more diversified in terms of the categories that they sell. These category killers, which includes even florists, are having a harder time of it because they just don't have the agility to offset those cost increases in one category, by raising them in another. So it really depends on the type of retailer, but I do think that the spirit of partnership is alive and well, and throughout the pandemic, suppliers and retailers forged better relationships, and I think that's going to be key, is sort of trading it off between suppliers and retailers, and not one party having to absorb all of it.
And even though consumers continue to spend, clearly, do you see them also adjusting the way they're spending? I mean, do you see them maybe skipping out on some celebrations, or maybe scaling them down, or making perhaps crafts of their own, kind of DIY types of projects? Do you see that at all?
Well, I would have to say all of the above, because it's really difficult to generalize about consumers. Some are trading off different experiences and different categories and, really pinching pennies, but others are ready to let it rip. Again, a lot of pent-up demand, and they're not going to be deterred by inflationary concerns because they have felt like they've been denied a lot of splurges and a lot of vacations and high-ticket purchases. So in some cases, they're actually better positioned to spend than they have been before. And, you know, when we were talking about Valentine's Day, for example, again, it just comes at a really good time when there is this pent-up demand, this desire to splurge, and also in many cases the resources to do it because they've been denying themselves other splurges.
So do you see this demand kind of bleeding into other holidays down the road? I mean, not just Valentine's Day, but just, you know, the other holidays that are coming up?
Well, we've been on a pretty good streak. I mean, considering all of the headwinds that have happened in retail and the labor shortages and the supply chain and COVID, it's just amazing how resilient retail has been and how resilient consumers have been. Boy, you would love to think that this somewhat positive streak will continue. But again, it's just a moving target, and it depends on the COVID situation, which right now seems to be looking up. It also depends on what happens in March with what, you know, the powers decide to do in terms of adjusting for inflation and the impact that that has on various economies. So I think there's room for cautious optimism at this point, but I wouldn't make a bet that we would be setting records all throughout the year.
I think cautious optimism is all we can hope for right now. Carol Spieckerman, president of Spieckerman Retail, thank you so much for joining our program today.